What happened when a family dinner turned into total war? I never thought a dinner table could become a battlefield. But that night, in the house I grew up in, surrounded by people who shared my blood, every word turned into a weapon. It started with something as small as the sound of my mother's spoon against her wine glass, a delicate chime that should have meant celebration. Instead, it felt like the warning bell before a fight. The air was already heavy before she stood. My father sat at the head of the table, knife and fork aligned perfectly on his plate, as if discipline extended even to his cutlery. My younger brother tapped his leg under the table, a nervous tick he thought no one noticed. My sister's smile was too wide, too rehearsed. I knew something was coming. I felt it in my chest the way you feel a storm before the first drop of rain. Mom cleared her throat. "We need to talk as a family." Her voice was calm, but I caught the way her eyes flickered toward Dad. It wasn't permission she was asking for, it was protection. "What now?" muttered Dad, still slicing his steak with surgical precision. "Haven't we had enough talking for one lifetime?" My brother scoffed. "Maybe if we'd actually said the truth before, we wouldn't be here again." The fork froze halfway to my mouth. That wasn't casual dinner banter. That was a challenge. And in our family, challenges didn't end quietly. Mom inhaled slowly. "It's about the house, the inheritance, the will." And there it was, the storm breaking open. The silence was sharp enough to cut skin. My sister dropped her fork, the clatter loud in the tension. "You promised us we'd never bring that up at dinner," she said, her voice trembling. "You promised," my brother snapped back, "but you also promised we'd be equal, and we both know that's not true." I tried to keep my face blank, but my pulse betrayed me, hammering against my throat. Equal? There was nothing equal about the way Dad always favored him, or how Mom always shielded her. I was the middle one, the balancing act, the forgotten referee in a game where the rules changed every time someone spoke. Dad finally set his knife down. The sound of steel against porcelain echoed like a gavel. "We are not doing this." His voice was low, final. But everyone knew low didn't mean finished. It meant boiling. My brother leaned forward. "Then when are we doing it, Dad? After you're gone? When we're tearing each other apart over scraps like vultures?" The words were too sharp, too close to truth. Dad's jaw tightened. "Watch your mouth." Mom reached for her wineglass, but missed, her hand trembling just slightly. "Maybe we should explain now before—" "Explain what?" I asked. My voice came out smaller than I intended. And that was the mistake. That little crack in my composure. Because all at once, everyone's eyes turned on me. Like I had pulled the trigger none of them had the courage to touch. Dad's gaze pinned me like an insect, but my brother barked a bitter laugh. "Of course she needs to know. She's part of this family, isn't she? Or are you going to cut her out like you did—" "Enough!" Dad slammed his hand down, rattling plates and glasses. My mother flinched. My sister let out a tiny gasp. But I couldn't unhear it. Cut me out? Cut who out? The shadows of our family history suddenly felt alive, crawling across the table, whispering in the corners of the room. I wanted to ask, but my throat tightened. My sister spoke instead. Her voice was low, but sharp. "If she doesn't know, she will. Secrets don't stay buried forever." Dad's face went pale for just a fraction of a second. Then he leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. "Fine. You want the truth? Let's tell her." Mom shook her head, whispering, "Not like this." But Dad's voice cut her off like a blade. "She deserves to know what kind of family she's part of." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the old clock in the hallway seemed to pause. Finally, my brother muttered, "You think you can control everything, but you can't. Not anymore." And that was when I realized this wasn't about money, or wills, or property. It was about control, about power, about every unspoken betrayal and buried resentment that had been festering under this roof for years. I looked at my sister. She wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother's lip quivered as if she wanted to speak but knew the cost. My father's expression was carved from stone, but his hands trembled slightly on the arms of his chair. The storm had broken, but the worst was still coming. Because I finally understood, dinner wasn't the battle. Dinner was only the opening shot in a war that had already started long before tonight. And before the night was over, I would learn a truth that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. The moment Dad said, "She deserves to know," the table felt colder. My food was untouched, my fork heavy in my hand, but I couldn't lift it. My skin prickled, waiting. Mom's voice was soft, trembling. "Please, John. Not here. Not like this." But Dad didn't flinch. He turned to me, his stare steady, merciless. "You want the truth? Fine. You should know what kind of people you come from, what kind of blood runs in your veins." My throat tightened. "What are you talking about?" He smirked. No warmth, no humor, just bitterness. "Do you know why your brother thinks he's owed more, why your sister feels untouchable? It's because this family isn't what you think. Half of it doesn't even belong to me." The words hit like a slap. I blinked, stunned. "What?" My brother slammed his palm against the table. "Don't do this, not to her." But Dad pressed on, his voice cutting through the tension like broken glass. "You're not mine. You never were." The room spun, my ears rang. My mother let out a strangled sound, half sob, half denial. My sister whispered, "Dad, please," but the damage was done. I stared at him, unable to breathe. "What do you mean, not yours?" Mom's face crumpled. She reached across the table, but I pulled back before her fingers could touch me. Her eyes glistened. It was before we married. A mistake. But you are mine. You're my daughter." The words were supposed to comfort me, but they felt like knives. My father leaned back, satisfied with the destruction he'd unleashed. "Raised you all these years, fed you, clothed you, and for what? So you could sit at this table and act like you have any right to question me?" My brother's face burned with anger. "This isn't her fault. Don't drag her into your power games." "Power games?" Dad barked a laugh, but it was humorless. "This is about truth, about family honor. You all act like I'm the villain, but I kept this family together while your mother—" He stopped himself, but the venom was already in the air. Mom's lip quivered. "John, stop." But he didn't. "While your mother was too busy crawling into someone else's bed." The words slammed into me harder than the first revelation. My stomach twisted. Mom's face turned white, then red, then collapsed into shame. No, this isn't real." But I knew it was. I saw it in her eyes. I saw it in the way my sister clutched her glass of water like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. My brother stood so quickly, his chair crashed to the floor. "That's enough. Do you hear me? That's enough." Dad rose too, towering over him, jaw clenched. "Sit down, boy, before you regret it." The air was thick with the possibility of violence. My sister began to cry, her shoulders shaking silently. I just sat there, frozen, staring at the man I thought was my father, realizing that every childhood memory, every moment of his approval or disapproval had been a performance built on a lie. "Who?" I managed to whisper. My voice cracked. "Who is my father, then?" The silence was immediate and absolute. Mom's face crumbled further, her hands trembling on the tablecloth. Dad sneered. "Tell her. Go on, tell her who her real daddy is." "I can't," she choked out. "You can't, or you won't,"
Dad spat. She shook her head violently, tears streaking down her face. It doesn't matter. She is mine. She's ours. We raised her together. Dad slammed his fist on the table so hard the dishes jumped. She is not mine. His voice boomed, and for the first time I realized this wasn't about me. It was about his pride, his control, his need to dominate every corner of this house, even the parts he hadn't built. My chest heaved, breath shallow. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to run. But all I could do was sit there, trembling as my world shattered. My brother stepped between Dad and me, his voice low but firm. "You're not going to do this to her. Not tonight." Dad's eyes narrowed. "You think you can protect her? You think you know what this family needs?" My brother didn't move, his jaw clenched. "I know she doesn't deserve this." For a long, tense moment, they stared at each other, two storms colliding in silence. And then slowly, Dad sat back down, his face shadowed, dangerous. Mom sobbed quietly into her hands. My sister wiped her tears, her eyes darted toward me with pity I couldn't stand. And me? I sat there, my mind spiraling. Not his, not his, not his. The words echoed inside my skull like a curse.
But deep down, beneath the shock, another thought took root. If he isn't my father, then who is? And worse, why had they kept it from me all these years? The answers were coming. I could feel it. But so was the war. I couldn't stop staring at him, the man I had called Dad my whole life. His square jaw, his rigid posture, the veins bulging in his temple as he gripped his chair like he was holding the entire house together with his fists. But he wasn't my father. He had just told me so. The taste of dinner, garlic, rosemary, red wine, turned to ash in my mouth. "I deserve to know," I whispered, though my voice cracked like a child's. "If he isn't my father, then who is?" Mom's fingers clutched her napkin until it tore in two. Her eyes darted toward Dad, then back to me. "Please, not now. Not like this." But Dad leaned forward, his mouth curling into something between a smirk and a snarl. "You think she'll protect you with half-truths? You think she cares about your feelings? She's been lying to you your whole damn life." "Stop," she begged. "John, please." "No," I said, louder than I expected. My chair scraped back across the floor. My hands trembled, but my voice hardened. "Tell me, right now." The room felt electric, like lightning was about to strike. My brother stood rigid, his fists balled at his sides. My sister pressed her palm against her lips, eyes brimming with tears. And then Mom spoke, barely a whisper. It was a neighbor. The words were ice water down my spine. Dad's laugh was sharp, ugly. "Neighbor? Don't make it sound cleaner than it was. She was sneaking around while I was working nights, too lonely, too bored, too selfish to wait for her husband to come home." Mom shook her head frantically, but her tears betrayed her. "It wasn't like that. I was young. I was scared. You were gone so much, and he was kind to me in ways you never were." "Don't you dare," Dad roared, slamming the table again. The silverware jumped, a wine glass tipped over, spilling red across the white tablecloth like blood spreading through fabric. The name tumbled out of Mom's mouth before she could stop herself. David Miller. And just like that, I couldn't breathe. David Miller. The name wasn't unfamiliar. He lived 2 streets over when I was little. A quiet man, widowed, always mowing his lawn on Saturdays.
He'd wave sometimes. I remembered playing with his daughter once, a summer afternoon chasing bubbles in his backyard. He had smiled at me then, kind and gentle. The memory slammed into me like a fist. Had I been playing in my father's yard and never known? Dad's face twisted with rage. Say his name again. Go on. Tell her who you betrayed me with. Mom collapsed into her hands, sobbing uncontrollably now. My sister whispered, "Oh, God." My brother muttered, "This isn't helping. None of this is helping." But my voice cut through the noise, shaky, desperate. He's alive. He's still here, isn't he? No one answered, but I saw the truth in my mother's eyes. My chest tightened, fury and grief and confusion crashing all at once. All of these years, you let me believe I belonged here. You let me believe I was... My voice broke. Your daughter. Dad's chair scraped back violently. He stood over the table, finger pointing at me like a gun. Don't you dare call me your father again. Don't you dare. The words cut deeper than any blade. My stomach lurched. My throat burned. My brother finally snapped. You don't get to say that. You raised her. You don't get to erase her just because your pride's bruised. Dad turned on him like a predator, voice dripping venom. You shut your mouth before I shut it for you. The air crackled with danger. My sister whimpered, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. I stood too, my chair nearly tipping. My voice was shaking, but fierce. If you're not my father, then I'll find the one who is. The words seemed to stun everyone. Even Mom's sobs quieted for a moment. Dad's face darkened, a storm ready to break. He leaned across the table, eyes blazing, because if you go looking for him, you won't like what you find.
The threat wasn't empty. It slithered into my bones, cold and suffocating. For a moment, no one breathed. The only sound was the steady drip of spilled wine sliding off the edge of the table onto the floor. My mother whispered my name, pleading, but I couldn't hear her. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heart and the echo of that name, David Miller. I didn't know what truth waited for me outside this house, but I knew one thing for certain. The man who raised me wasn't my father, and the man who might be was close enough to touch, and I was going to find him, no matter what it cost. I barely remember leaving the table. One moment I was staring at Dad's fury, the next I was out in the night air, my chest heaving, the cool wind slapping my face like it was trying to wake me up. The house behind me buzzed with muffled shouting. My brother's voice rose and fell, my sister's sobs cracked the air, and Dad's thunderous rage shook the walls. But I couldn't go back inside. Not yet. Not after what I'd just heard. David Miller. The name spun inside my skull, dizzying, relentless. If Mom was telling the truth, and her tear-streaked face told me she was, then everything I thought I knew about myself was a lie. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from my brother. Stay outside. Don't come back in until he calms down. I ignored it. My legs were already moving. Down the driveway, across the street, toward the old neighborhood where David Miller still lived. I knew the way by instinct. I'd biked it as a kid, skinned knees and laughter echoing down the same pavement that now felt like a tightrope above an abyss. Every step was heavy, but unstoppable. His house looked smaller than I remembered. White siding peeling at the corners, porch light flickering. A truck sat in the driveway, its paint chipped, rust eating away at the wheel wells. The yard was quiet, too quiet. I stood at the curb, heart hammering. What was I doing? What did I expect? To knock on his door and hear, "Yes, I'm your real father. Come inside." but something stronger than fear pushed me forward. I climbed the porch steps. The wood creaked under my weight, loud in the silence of the night. My hand hovered over the doorbell. I was seconds away from pressing it when a voice behind me made me jump. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around. It was Mom. Her hair was a mess, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes were sharp, desperate. She must have followed me. "How did you think I wouldn't notice when my daughter ran out of the house like a ghost was chasing her?" She snapped, then softened. "Sweetheart, please, don't do this." "Don't do what? Find out who I am? Find out who he is?" Her lips trembled. "It won't help you. It won't bring you peace. It will only make things worse." Worse than sitting at that table, being told I don't belong? Worse than knowing I've been lied to my entire life? My hands shook, fists at my sides. "You should have told me." She reached out like she could hold me together with her fingers. "I thought I was protecting you." Protecting me from the truth, or protecting yourself from the shame? The words hit her hard. I saw it in the way her shoulders sagged, the way her eyes darted toward the door behind me. She whispered, "I begged him once. Begged him to stay away, to let us live in peace. He agreed. He promised. That's why you don't remember him." Her voice broke. "But if you knock on that door, everything comes back, and you'll see a man who isn't what you think he is. You'll see the wreckage of choices I made. You'll hate me more than you already do." I swallowed hard. My hand hovered near the doorbell again. "Maybe I'll hate you. Maybe I'll hate him, but at least I'll know." She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He's not the savior you're imagining. He's not the father you think you lost. He's broken, he's bitter, and he'll ruin you if you let him in." The porch light flickered again, buzzing like an insect caught in glass. Behind the door, I thought I heard movement, a shadow shifting past the thin curtain of the front window. My breath caught in my throat. He was home. Mom saw the recognition on my face and grabbed my wrist. "Please, don't. If you open that door, there's no going back." I stared at her, at the woman who raised me with lullabies and lies. My skin burned under her grip. My heart pounded like it wanted to break free of my chest. I pulled my wrist away. Maybe there's no going back, but there's no staying still either. And before she could stop me, I pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed inside the house, a haunting, hollow sound. The shadow in the window froze, then moved toward the door. My mother's sharp inhale cut through the night like a knife. The doorknob turned. The door creaked open. And for the first time in my life, I came face to face with the man who might be my father. The man in the doorway was older than I remembered, but there was no mistaking him. David Miller. His hair was mostly gray now, his face weathered, lined by years of sun and something darker. He looked at me with confusion, then recognition, and then something else, a flicker that made my stomach twist. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. His voice was rough, like gravel dragged across pavement. His eyes flicked from me to my mother standing behind me. My mother's voice trembled. "David, don't." But I stepped forward. "Are you my father?" The words came out like a demand, not a question. My whole body was shaking, but my voice was iron. David's mouth opened, then closed. His gaze lingered on my face, scanning me like a map he'd seen before but couldn't quite place. Finally, he said, "You look just like her." My chest constricted. "So it's true?" Mom grabbed my arm, desperate. "Don't do this here.
Not like this." But David ignored her. He leaned against the doorframe, the porch light carving shadows across his hollow cheeks. "I told you to keep her away from me. That was the deal." "The deal?" I snapped. "What deal? You knew about me this whole time and just, what, pretended I didn't exist?" David's eyes hardened. "You think it was my choice? She begged me to disappear, said it was for the best." "Because you didn't want responsibility," Mom spat, her voice cracking. "Because you didn't want to give up your freedom." He barked a bitter laugh. "That's rich coming from the woman who hid my child for nearly 20 years. The word child hit me like a fist. My knees went weak. I gripped the porch railing just to stay upright. "You could have come for me," I whispered. "You could have tried." David's gaze softened for just a moment. His voice dropped. "I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to. But every time I came close, your mother shut the door. Said you were better off with him." He jerked his chin toward our house, where my father, no, John, still sat in his throne at the head of the table. I turned to Mom, my throat raw. "Is that true?" Her silence was louder than any confession. Something inside me cracked. The girl I had been, the one who trusted, who believed in bedtime stories and family dinners, was gone. All that was left was a stranger standing on this porch, staring at two people who had built my life on lies. David rubbed his jaw, his eyes never leaving me. "You came here because you want the truth. But truth's not a gift. It's a curse. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it." "I don't care," I said. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. "I deserve to know." He studied me for a long moment, then he opened the door wider. "Fine. Come in." Mom's grip on my arm tightened. "No, please, don't go inside." Her desperation rattled me more than anything. She wasn't just scared, I realized. She was terrified. "What are you so afraid of?" I asked. Her lips trembled. "He'll poison you against me." David snorted. "Like you haven't already done that yourself?" The tension between them was suffocating, and I stood caught in the middle, my heart thundering, every instinct screaming that whichever path I chose, nothing would ever be the same again. I took a breath. Then I stepped past my mother and into David Miller's house. The air inside was stale, tinged with smoke and something metallic. The furniture was worn, old, like time had frozen the place decades ago. Photographs lined the mantel. His daughter, his late wife, moments of a life I'd never been part of. My eyes scanned for something, anything, that might tether me to him. "Sit," he said, motioning to a battered armchair. I lowered myself into it, my pulse still racing. Mom lingered in the doorway, wringing her hands like a child caught in a lie. David leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You want the truth? Here it is. I am your father. Biologically, anyway. But don't think that makes me a saint, or even a good man." His words were blunt, brutal. Mom made a strangled noise, but he kept going. "I made mistakes. I was weak. I loved your mother when I shouldn't have, and when she told me to disappear, I did. Doesn't matter how many excuses I make, it's still the truth." The weight of it pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. My hands clenched the arms of the chair. "Why now?" I asked, my voice small. "Why tell me this now?" David's eyes darkened. "Because you rang my doorbell, and once you open a door, you better be ready for what walks through." The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. My mother's quiet sobs filled the doorway. And then David added, almost as an afterthought,
And because there's more. A lot more. Things you don't know. Things he doesn't want you to know. He nodded toward our house, his expression grim. My blood ran cold. What things? David's gaze locked onto mine. The kind of things that turned dinner into war. I felt my stomach drop as soon as he said it. The kind of things that turned dinner into war. What do you mean? My voice cracked, but the demand was there, sharp and unrelenting. David didn't answer right away. He lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his tired face before smoke coiled upward in lazy circles. He exhaled slowly, as if buying time. You think John's the victim in all this? That man isn't just angry because of what your mother did. He's angry because I know what he did. My mother's voice cut like a knife. Stop! But he ignored her. She doesn't know, does she? Don't you dare! Does she? His voice rose, gravel and thunder, and for a moment I saw in him the same rage I just left behind at our table. My pulse thundered. What no? Mom stepped forward, her face pale, desperate. Sweetheart, some truths don't set you free. They trap you, please. I stood up from the armchair, my legs trembling, but firm. Stop talking around it. Tell me what he did. David's gaze flicked toward Mom. You want to say it, or should I? Her silence was answer enough. David crushed the cigarette into an overflowing ashtray. Your father, your so-called father, John, he isn't just a man with a temper. He's violent. Always has been. And not just to me, not just to your mother. My head spun. What are you saying? David's expression hardened. I'm saying he's hurt people. Covered it up. People trusted him, and he made sure no one ever found out. Mom's breath hitched. David, stop it. You don't know what you're talking about. But David's glare sliced through her. Don't protect him. Not anymore. I turned to her, my voice shaking. Is it true? She froze, her lips parting, but no words came. Her silence was louder than any confession. My chest ached like it might burst open. Who? I whispered. Who did he hurt? David hesitated, his jaw clenched. Neighbors, workers, even family. His voice dropped. Your brother. The room tilted, my knees nearly buckled. No, I breathed. No, not him. David's face was carved from stone. Ask him. Ask your brother why he left home for 3 years, why he wouldn't answer your father's calls. Ask him what John did the night he swore he'd never come back. Mom collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook with sobs, but she didn't deny it. She couldn't. My brother, my strong, stubborn brother, who had always seemed older than his years, who flinched when Dad raised his voice, but never explained why. The puzzle pieces slammed into place with sickening clarity. I staggered back a step, nearly knocking over a lamp. Oh my God. Mom's sobs filled the silence. David's eyes were hard, but not cruel. Now you see, the truth isn't a gift, it's poison, and John has been poisoning your whole family for years. The sound of my heartbeat roared in my ears. I thought of Dad's face at the dinner table, the veins in his forehead, the slam of his fist, and then I thought of my brother standing between us, his body rigid, his voice low, like he'd done it before, too many times. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the walls down around me. Instead, I whispered, "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Mom's muffled voice came from behind her trembling hands. Because we thought silence was safer. If we just kept the peace, if we kept quiet, we could survive. David shook his head. Silence isn't peace, it's surrender. The words landed like stones. My body felt heavy, anchored by truths I wasn't ready to carry. Then suddenly, a sharp knock rattled the door behind me.
All three of us froze. Another knock, louder this time. A familiar voice thundered through the wood. "Open this door, David, right now." My blood went cold. Dad. I whipped around. Through the thin curtains, I could see his silhouette on the porch, shoulders squared, fists clenched. His presence filled the night like a storm rolling in, unstoppable and violent. My mother gasped, "John, please don't." But he slammed the door with his fist. "I know she's in there. She's my daughter, and you don't get to poison her against me." David's jaw tightened. He reached into a drawer and pulled out something that gleamed under the porch light seeping through the window. A knife. My stomach lurched. "David, no!" Mom pleaded. "Don't make this worse." But David's voice was flat, cold. "He's not coming in here." The pounding grew louder, each blow shaking the frame. "Open the damn door!" My heart hammered as I stood caught between two men, one who raised me with iron fists and one who abandoned me with empty hands. And for the first time in my life, I realized this wasn't just a family argument anymore. This was war. The pounding shook the walls. Each slam of my father's fist sent vibrations through the thin floorboards, rattling the picture frames on David's wall. "Open this door!" Dad bellowed. His voice was deeper, darker than usual, like it carried years of buried rage. Mom clutched my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Please," she whispered. "Please, we have to leave before he—" But David cut her off. His grip on the knife was steady, his voice like steel. "He's not taking her back." I stood frozen between them, my pulse a drumbeat in my ears. One man ready to fight, one woman ready to flee, and me, trembling, caught in the middle of their war. The doorknob rattled violently. "You hear me?" Dad shouted. "She's mine, not yours, never yours." The words sliced through me. Mine, not mine, the same claim he'd thrown across the dinner table hours earlier, but now it was feral, desperate. David stepped closer to the door. "You lost that right the moment you laid hands on your family." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Dad's laughter came, low, cruel, chilling. "You don't know a damn thing about family. You never stuck around long enough to learn." The laughter ended abruptly with a loud crash. The glass pane in the front door shattered, shards scattering across the floor, as a hand forced its way inside, fumbling for the lock. "Back away!" David roared, lunging forward. I screamed as the two men collided, one arm through the broken window, the other slashing with a knife. The porch light flickered wildly, shadows jerking across the room. Mom yanked me backward. "Go, now!" But I couldn't move. My legs were cement. My eyes were locked on the chaos at the door.
Dad forced the lock open with a guttural growl. The door swung wide, slamming against the wall. He stood in the frame, blood dripping from his forearm where the glass had cut him, his eyes wild and burning. The room went silent for one terrifying heartbeat. Then he charged. David met him halfway, knife flashing in the dim light. The clash was raw, brutal, fists against blade, years of resentment exploding into violence. They stumbled into furniture, knocking over a lamp, crashing into the table. Mom screamed, covering her ears. I stood paralyzed, watching the man who raised me and the man who made me destroy each other. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice breaking. "Please stop!" But they didn't. Dad landed a punch that sent David sprawling. The knife skittered across the floor, spinning until it stopped at my feet. My chest tightened as I stared at it. "Pick it up," David wheezed from the floor. "Don't let him." But Dad kicked him hard in the ribs, silencing him. He turned toward me, his chest heaving, his eyes wild. "Give me that knife," he growled. I shook my head, trembling. "No. Now." His voice was a command, the same one I'd heard my whole life, the voice that made me sit up straighter, shut my mouth, obey without question. But something inside me cracked. The girl who once obeyed was gone. I bent down slowly, my fingers wrapping around the knife handle. The weight was heavier than I expected, cold, final. Dad's eyes narrowed. "You don't know what you're doing." "Maybe I do," I whispered. He took a step closer. Blood streaked his arm, his face twisted in rage, but his voice softened into something almost pleading. "I raised you. I put food in your mouth, clothes on your back. Don't forget that." Tears blurred my vision. My arm shook as I lifted the blade between us. "And you broke me. Every time you slammed your fist, every time you made us afraid, you broke us." He froze, just for a moment, his breath caught. Maybe it was the first time he'd ever heard me defy him. Behind him, David coughed, clutching his ribs. "Don't let him win," he rasped. Dad's gaze flicked toward him, and something ugly flashed in his eyes. "Shut your mouth before I shut it for you." He lunged. Instinct took over. I screamed and swung the knife, the blade flashing through the air. For a split second, I thought I'd cut him, thought the nightmare was over, but he twisted at the last second, my hand glancing across his arm instead of his chest. The blade nicked flesh. He hissed, blood welling. Rage exploded in his face. He grabbed my wrist, squeezing so hard I felt my bones grind. "You ungrateful little—" David dragged himself upright, throwing his body into Dad before he could finish. The two men collided again, crashing against the wall. The knife slipped from my hand, clattering across the floorboards. "Run!" David yelled, straining against Dad's bulk. "Get out now!" But I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. I was rooted, watching as they tore at each other, years of hate and betrayal unleashed in violent bursts. Mom was screaming, her voice hoarse. "Stop! Please stop!" But neither man heard her. Dad slammed David's head against the wall, leaving a smear of red. "You think you can take my family from me? You think you can take her?" David spat blood. "She was never yours to keep." The words lit a fuse. Dad roared, hands tightening around David's throat. Something inside me snapped. I grabbed the nearest object, an old brass lamp from the table, and swung it with every ounce of strength I had. The crash echoed like thunder. Dad staggered, his grip loosening. David gasped for air and shoved him backward. "Now!" David yelled. The knife still lay on the floor, glinting in the dim light. My eyes locked on it. My breath came fast and shallow. I dove for it. My fingers closed around the handle. The weight was familiar now, terrifyingly so. Dad turned toward me, blood dripping from his temple where the lamp had struck. His face was unrecognizable, half man, half monster. "Put it down, or I swear to God, you'll regret it." My hand shook, but I raised the blade. My voice cracked. "No, I won't." We stood frozen, locked in a silent standoff. David leaned against the wall, bloodied but alive, watching with hollow eyes. Mom crouched in the corner, sobbing into her hands. For one terrifying moment, the world narrowed to me and him, my father. Not my father. The man who had raised me, fed me, terrified me. The man who had built my life on lies and fists. And in that moment, I saw clearly. If I dropped the knife, he would win. Not just tonight, but forever. He would own me, break me, twist me into something unrecognizable. My breath came in shallow bursts. My grip tightened. "You're not my father." His eyes widened. Something dark flickered there. Shock, fury, maybe even fear. He opened his mouth to speak. But I moved first. The blade flashed once. A sound tore from his throat, a strangled gasp, and he staggered back, eyes wide with disbelief. Blood bloomed across his shirt, spreading like wine spilled on a tablecloth. He looked at me, stunned. his mouth opening and closing like he wanted to say something. Then his knees buckled. The crash of his body hitting the floor shook the room. The knife slipped from my hand, my chest heaved, the weight of what I'd done pressing down on me. Silence followed. A silence so heavy it suffocated. Mom sobbed harder, rocking back and forth. David stared at me, his chest heaving, his expression unreadable. I stumbled back, my legs shaking. I didn't mean to, but deep down, I knew I had. The man who raised me lay on the floor, bleeding out. The man who might have been my real father leaned against the wall, barely able to stand. And me? I stood in the wreckage, my hands stained with the truth. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have called. Neighbors, maybe, or my sister. The flashing red and blue lights drew closer. I looked down at my hands, trembling, covered in blood that wasn't mine. And I realized with chilling clarity, this war was over. But the cost of winning would haunt me forever. The sirens grew louder, a chorus of doom cutting through the night. I stood frozen in the center of the room, the knife at my feet, my breath ragged. My father, John, lay on the floor, blood soaking through his shirt. His chest still moved in shallow, jerky rises, but each one sounded weaker than the last. Mom crawled to his side, her sobs raw, frantic. "John, no, stay with me. Please, don't leave me like this."
Her voice cracked, torn between grief and terror. For a moment, she wasn't the mother who lied to me. She was just a woman watching her whole world bleed out on the floor. David staggered forward, clutching his ribs, his eyes locked on me. "You need to get out of here," he rasped. I shook my head violently. "No, I can't. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. I stabbed him." David's gaze softened. "You defended yourself. You didn't have a choice." But the blood on my hands told another story. The pounding of boots on gravel echoed outside. Shouts followed. "Police! Open the door!" The front door hung broken on its hinges. Glass shattered across the floor. Officers flooded in, guns raised, flashlights cutting through the chaos. "Drop the weapon," one of them barked. My body jolted. The knife still lay by my feet. I raised my shaking hands, palms open. I don't... David raised his hands too, coughing. "It's not her fault. She was defending herself. He broke in." But the officers swarmed past him, pulling me aside, forcing me down onto the cold floor. My cheek pressed against the wood. A knee dug into my back. Metal cuffs snapped around my wrists. "I didn't mean to," I cried, my voice cracking. "He was going to kill him. He was going to kill us." Everything blurred. Mom screaming, David arguing, officers shouting commands. The red and blue lights painted the walls like a nightmare carnival. As they pulled me to my feet, I caught one last glimpse of my father. His eyes were half open, staring at nothing. For the first time in my life, he looked small, weak, human. And then they dragged me outside. The cold night air hit me like a slap. Neighbors crowded the street, faces pale, whispering, pointing. My sister stood at the edge of the lawn, her hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. My brother was beside her, his expression carved from stone. When his eyes met mine, I saw it. The truth David had tried to tell me. The bruises I never asked about. The silence that always hung around him whenever Dad entered the room. He didn't need to say anything. I knew. The officers pushed me into the back of a cruiser. The doors slammed shut. The world outside became muted, distorted through glass. Mom's voice carried faintly through the chaos. She's my daughter. Please, she didn't mean to. She was protecting us." But the officers didn't listen. David limped toward the car, his face pale. For a moment, I thought he'd say something, that he'd reach through the glass, claim me, rescue me. Instead, he stopped short. His eyes met mine, heavy with something I couldn't name. Guilt, regret, recognition. Then he looked away. The cruiser pulled out of the driveway, the sirens rising again. I pressed my forehead to the window, staring at the house I grew up in. Shattered windows, blood on the floor, a family broken beyond repair. The ride was silent except for the hum of the engine. My thoughts spiraled, looping the same words. I killed him. I killed him. But another voice whispered underneath, quieter, colder. No, you survived him. At the station, they led me into a sterile room, sat me in a chair, uncuffed my wrists. A detective entered, her notepad ready. She looked at me like I was both victim and suspect. She said softly, "Start from the beginning." So I did. I told her about the dinner, the secrets, the fight, about the knife, about the years of fear. My voice cracked, broke, faltered, but I spoke until the words were gone. When I finished, the detective closed her notepad. Her eyes softened. "This won't be easy, but you did what you had to do." I nodded numbly, though the words barely registered. Hours later, they released me into my brother's custody. My sister clung to me, sobbing. My mother couldn't even look at me. David never showed. That night, I lay awake in my brother's guest room, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, too quiet. Every creak of the walls sounded like a fist against the table, every shadow like the silhouette of a man who claimed me as his and yet never truly was. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. Instead, I saw blood blooming across a shirt, saw the flicker of rage in a dying man's eyes, saw the knife in my shaking hands. The war was over, but peace didn't follow. I realized something then, something that chilled me to the bone. Survival doesn't heal you. It changes you. It marks you. And that night, I stopped recognizing who I was.